ESPN breaking news. Dolphins have fired head coach Mike McDaniel. This is just in. Dolphins owner Stephen Ross met with McDaniel this week to discuss the season. After that meeting and reflection, Ross decided to move on. There are layers to this news. Obviously, Caroline Fenton, Jason Fitz, as we break it down, just coming in across the desk. And Caroline, look, there's going to be a lot of conversation about what this means around Harbaugh, because certainly the report that came out after Harbaugh was fired were that 7 teams reached out within 45 minutes. There were only 6 openings, not including the Baltimore Ravens. They obviously didn't reach out. That led to reports that the Dolphins were the team that reached out. Whether we believe those reports or not, now you have the Dolphins firing Mike McDaniel. It's hard not to look at all of this and ask, well, does it mean that they're hiring Harbaugh? Does it mean that McDaniel found out that they were talking to Harbaugh and got angry and just said, I don't want part of this, and it led to something? I mean, it's just hard not to have some level of speculation around Harbaugh because of the timing of this, Caroline.
It's not that difficult to read between the lines in timing. If Stephen Ross, the owner of the Miami Dolphins, looked at what Mike McDaniel did this season at the finale, after the finale of the season, and said this wasn't good enough, fine, I understand. Then you can make that evaluation independent of anything else. This season was a disappointment and somebody has to show for it. But that's not what happened. That actually, in fact, Stephen Ross did kind of pledge of allegiance to Mike McDaniel at one point in the season and said in the middle of the season that there wouldn't be sweeping changes that were made. Now we see Mike McDaniel fired just days after John Harbaugh was fired in Baltimore. I have to think that plays at least a little bit of a part into this. We actually talked about this, Fitzy. I think that was yesterday. Who knows? Time flies. We said that there may be some owners and general managers that consider changes that they maybe weren't previously considering because John Harbaugh was on the market. John Harbaugh, a guy that I think is widely viewed as one of the best coaches in the National Football League. When a guy like that becomes available, doesn't happen very often, things start to change. You start to consider things that you previously didn't. So I wouldn't be surprised if John Harbaugh does have something to do with this. Does that inevitably mean that John Harbaugh is going to be in Miami next year? No, not necessarily. That's not a foregone conclusion. Because if we look at the Miami job, I don't think it's the best one. You have a question mark at the quarterback position. You have a big salary cap issue with Tua Tagovailoa and how much money he is owed next season. You also play in a division with Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills and Drake May and the New England Patriots. That's an uphill climb to find yourself in the postseason. So I don't view this Dolphins job as necessarily the best on the market. And John Harbaugh is, I believe, going to have his pick of the litter. But I can't imagine that John Harbaugh has nothing to do with this firing.
Right, and this is one of those things where, again, going back to the tweet that was up a second ago from Shefty saying sources, Dolphins have not contacted Harbaugh or made inquiries into other coaches. This was an independent decision apart from general manager.
You buy that?
No, I mean, look, that's what they got to say at this point, because Harbaugh, according to multiple reports, has made it clear he's not interviewing anywhere. But to your point, look, I have no problem moving on with Mike McDaniel if that's what you're going to do. I don't think that's going to fix anything for Miami. They have the 4th least amount of salary cap space right now. They're $34 million over the cap. Now, this is where Dolphins fans will come in and say, it doesn't really matter because we can make some cuts. You're right. Tyreek Hill, for example, not going to play under this contract. There's no way. Bradley Chubb has a huge cap number. They can get rid of some big cap numbers and get themselves into a healthier position, but they won't be as healthy as, let's say, some of the teams that are sitting there at the top of this thing that currently have $110 million in available cap. You're not touching that. So you won't have the spending power on cap space that other teams have. To your point, Tua Tagovailoa's contract is wildly difficult. Like, all of this speculation that Tua is done in Miami, I'd ask somebody to tell me how. If he's cut pre-June 1st, the cap hit is $99 million. If he's cut post-June 1st, it's $67 million, which is actually greater than the cap hit number is just to keep him on the roster. So there is no clear path to a quarterback. Tua is probably not the quarterback. He's too expensive. No idea what they're doing there. Like, this job feels dysfunctional in a division that has the Patriots and the Bills doing what the Patriots and the Bills are both going to do year in and year out. So, look, like, I don't know that firing Mike McDaniel's a mistake. I just don't know that somebody else is going to come in and have any more success. If the question is, how do we turn this thing around? I think the real answer from almost anybody that takes that job is we don't. It's going to take a few years to do that. And it's a long process with a lot of variables involved.
Yeah, to your point, I don't think that this is a mistake. In fact, at one point in the season, I was advocating for this. I said several times, and I stand by it. The Dolphins should have ripped this thing down to the studs and totally and completely cleaned house because that team was a mess. They got off to a 1-6 start. I actually just read a quick article whenever this news broke, and one of the lines was the Miami Dolphins invented new ways to lose. That's kind of what it felt like at times. And then you saw this surge toward the end of the season, 4 consecutive wins, including one over the Buffalo Bills. And I gave Mike McDaniel credit. And I thought he deserved it. I gave him credit for keeping this team together, even after the general manager was fired, even after their season was pretty much totally and completely over with. They kept this thing on the rails. And that's a testament to coaching. That's a testament to keep guys focused even when they're already planning their trips to Cancun in January in the month of October. I gave Mike McDaniel a whole lot of credit for that. But overall, if you look at the entirety of the season, independent of John Harbaugh, independent of who might be out there, of who you could hire for next season, this Miami Dolphins season was a disappointment. This Miami Dolphins team has been a disappointment over the last couple of years. No longer can we hold on to that 50-point game against the Denver Broncos several years ago. You don't have enough to show from this team or from Mike McDaniel the last couple of years. I don't disagree with the decision to move on from him. The timing just feels a little fishy.
I also think that as much as right now, so many fan bases are clamor. They're going to say, oh, man, Mike McDaniel, offensive genius. We want Mike McDaniel. Okay, I guess my question is, do you have better pieces for him to play chess with than he had in Miami? If you don't like Tua, that's fine. But understand that Tua was given his contract extension with Mike McDaniel at the helm. It was Mike McDaniel that turned around and said, yeah, this is my guy. I can win with him. So I'm not going to buy any excuses that the quarterback hampered him because he was in the room to evaluate him every day. On top of that, Tyreek Hill, again, probably not going to be a Dolphin next year, fine. But you had Tyreek Hill, you had Jalen Waddle, you had Devon Achane. You look at some of the offensive weapons that he was playing with, this team should have been dominant year in and year out. So if you're turning around saying, oh, my God, Mike McDaniel is my head coach next year, he's going to be able to fix my offense. My question is, do you have better weapons than the Dolphins have had over the course of the last several years? And if the answer is no, why will the result be any different? Mike McDaniel might be better suited to be an offensive coordinator somewhere right now. I mean, maybe that's the answer here. I think the hardest part with some of these tenures is turning around and asking the question, what went wrong? And when you can't necessarily find the one thing, like what was the one thing that Miami just couldn't get a hold of that Mike McDaniel didn't do the right way? There isn't necessarily one answer to that. But the fact is, they have underperformed since he got there relative to the pieces that I think he was given to play with and relative to the expectations he was supposed to have when he got into the league as a head coach.
Yeah, and I don't think that Mike McDaniel was the sole reason why the Dolphins were 7-10, missed out on the playoffs, and overall were a disappointment. Of course not. Whenever you have a disappointing season, it's never just one person's fault. But it's not like Mike McDaniel is blameless. Of course, he's the head coach. He's going to get a significant portion of the blame pie. If I am an owner across the NFL, I would be hesitant to hire Mike McDaniel as a head coach. I think Mike McDaniel is an offensive savant. I think he's an offensive genius, especially coming from the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. The Kyle Shanahan coaching tree, I think, has and deserves an insurmountable benefit of the doubt. That I want a guy that has a little bit of that DNA, a little bit of that razzle-dazzle and offensive magic, which is why I agree with you. I think Mike McDaniel probably has a couple of years of being an offensive coordinator before he finds that next head coaching job again. We've seen that so many times across the NFL. Look at Robert Saleh. Was the head coach with the New York Jets, got fired, now DC and San Francisco, and Robert Saleh will probably be a head coach somewhere else. I think that's probably the path for Mike McDaniel. I think you also have to look at it and say, look, Mike McDaniel has a quirky and kooky personality. Mike McDaniel has a very laissez-faire attitude. How many owners in the NFL want their head coach to represent themselves in the organization that way? I'm not saying it's wrong, and I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it is what it is. Mike McDaniel's a quirky dude with his vape pen in his pocket on the sidelines, wearing, his cool glasses and his funky shoes. That doesn't necessarily fit the identity or the style of a lot of owners across the NFL. Like, you think that he's going to be the next head coach of the Ravens? I don't see that as a fit.
Well, and on top of all of that, look at the candidates that are out there. We all know that Harbaugh at this point is in a league of his own, candidate-wise. And I will stand by something I've said on this show for 3 straight days. I don't think you're going to see a lot of movement when it comes to hiring head coaches because, frankly, everybody's going to wait to see how the rest of this shakes out. Harbaugh's going to wait to see what other jobs come open. As those jobs come open, teams are going to wait to see what other candidates come open. So I think there's a lot of different pieces that have to sort of fall in place here. But Harbaugh is clearly the best candidate. And then for many people, Stefanski has been the second best candidate. At least I can look at Stefanski in Cleveland, and I can look at it and say, okay, like, given the hand that you were playing with, I don't think a lot of coaches would have had more success. My question is, given the hand that Mike McDaniel was playing with, do I believe most coaches could have had similar or better success? Probably. And again, this all comes back to Tua. And I get it. I get where we are on Tua today. And I understand a lot of people saying, my God, Tua is not a legitimate starting quarterback in the NFL. I agree with that. But the reason that the Dolphins are stuck where they are stuck right now is because organizationally they decided to give Tua a massive contract, right? And that massive contract was done with the GM that's no longer in the building and Mike McDaniel. And so either Mike McDaniel didn't have the power to stop that move, which is concerning if he's the offensive guru, or he didn't have the foresight to see that it was going to turn out the way it was, which is concerning because he's an offensive guru. I know the Rams are the one team that signed a quarterback to a bunch of money and then found their way out of it when they got rid of Goff, right? Like, I understand that happens sometimes, but man, it's hard for me to look at all of this and even put Mike McDaniel as a top 3 candidate right now. So I struggle. This feels like it might be the right move, but I feel like everybody's worse for where they are right now.
You get hired and fired in this league for what you decide to do at the quarterback position. Oh, we've seen it, a million times over. And that's exactly what has happened for Mike McDaniel. And if we want to look at what comes next for him, I'm going to just go ahead and project that he will be an offensive coordinator rather than a head coach somewhere. And maybe he is a head coach somewhere. Maybe there's enough that any owner across the league has seen that they want to at least interview Mike McDaniel and he can find himself a head coaching job. I think one place that would potentially make sense is the Giants. I would love to see what he could do with all of those weapons with Malik Neighbors and Cam Scadaboo and how he works with Jackson Dart. I also think the opening in Washington is incredibly intriguing. I mean, Mike McDaniel was on Dan Quinn's staff in 2015 in Atlanta. They've worked together before. Cliff Kingsbury was relieved of his duties in Washington, which again, I will go back to and stand by. I think that's a horrific mistake. But the way that you recover from it is bringing in yet another offensive genius. And Mike McDaniel joining that commander staff with Dan Quinn, reuniting with that head coach that he worked under about a decade ago, and working with Jaden Daniels. I would love that. Sign me up for that. So I'm going to predict that Mike McDaniel is either the next OC with New York or potentially the Commanders.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And that depends on, who they hire. Like, if the Giants turn around and hire Stefanski, does Stefanski want Mike McDaniel to run his offense? That's going to be, it's really going to be interesting.
Yeah.
And, certainly I think coaches can learn a lot from their first opportunity as a head coach that they take with them for their second opportunity. I'm not somebody that ever faults teams for hiring somebody for their second shot. I had somebody in the league tell me years ago that sometimes you have to go through that first shot to figure out what actually matters. And when you do it the second time, you do it much better. I think there's some truth to that. So I'm not going to say that Mike McDaniel's done being on the sidelines in the NFL. I think that would be unfair to where this is all going to go. But I do think there are some opportunities this year as an offensive coordinator where he could sort of refresh his identity. Also, what does this all mean for Tua? Is the next coach going to come in and actually believe in Tua and try yet again to reclaim that quarterback's career? Caroline, that's going to be wild to me.
Would you? If they bring someone in, let's say as a first-time head coach, are you hitching your wagon to Tua? I wouldn't.
I mean, if my choice is Tua or Quinn Ewers, I can walk myself into liking the Miami job the least. I over the course of the last 8 minutes of talking about this, I've walked myself into feeling like the worst job of all the openings between what's in the division, between what you're stuck with at the quarterback position, between the lack of a path to a solution to the quarterback position. I think the Dolphins might be the worst of all the openings. So we'll keep covering it. And tomorrow we'll be right back here at 9 a.m. to handle everything. Thank you so much for watching. She's Caroline Fenton. I'm Jason Fitz. Come back, watch more Yahoo Sports.